Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is going to be a review of 3 books. Flesh Guitar by Geoff Nicholson, In the Jaws of Life by Dubravka Ugresic, and William S. Burroughs, The Revised Boy Scout Manual. I'm just taking them in the order that I read them. This is Flesh Guitar by Geoff Nicholson. I've read one of his previous books called Bleeding London a long time ago. I picked this up as a sort of complete punt because I like the idea of the blurb and, you know, I'm into music and all that sort of thing. And it starts off with this woman guitarist who has some sort of flesh guitar, and she plays her final ever concert in this real sort of dive bar where, you know, it's a really hostile audience, and she sort of, you know, wows them. And then at the end of the gig she hands her guitar to one of the punters there and walks out. And what follows is a series of riffs, really, guitar fiction riffs. There's no plot really, everything's sort of told in flashback. It only comes right back at the end as to why that was her, you know, a gig consciously played to, you know, an audience that no one had heard of her when, you know, she was pretty famous, why she gave her guitar away, etc, etc. Some of the riffs are quite funny, quite good, quite inventive. Others are a bit preposterous. So, for example, she's lost in the Australian outback desert with a guy who sort of has Aboriginal roots, but having grown up in the city, was completely cut off from them, and therefore couldn't guide his way through a paper bag. They get lost, and she plays her electric guitar, she plays an impromptu concert through an amp, and that way they're discovered in the night through the sound travelling. Yeah, there's another one where, you know, sort of music and sound and guitar are used to help stage a prison jailbreak. There are flashback sequences where she visits Robert Johnson on his deathbed, Kurt Cobain as he sat there with a shotgun about to put it into his mouth, 14-year-old Frank Zappa, and Jimi Hendrix. And, you know, she goes there ostensibly to find out sort of guitar playing tips. It's never explained why she's time travelling. You know, is this astral projection? You know, what is this? There's another scene where one of her early concerts, she hooks up with this guy who's a sort of young sort of performance artist, and he's sort of come up with all these scenarios of playing the guitar without playing the guitar. So things like, you know, to make random sound, you know, things like using balloons and various things to strike the strings at random and all that, which is sort of quite inventive, but none of this holds together. You know, this is a series of guitar riffs, some more entertaining than others, and it speaks to the point of it's really difficult to write about sound, to find words to describe sound. I've only ever seen it done well once in fiction. That was Jeff Noon's Needle in the Groove. So again, you know, this book was quite unsatisfactory really. You know, there wasn't a story, there wasn't a plot. She might have been an interesting character, but there's too many sort of, you know, we come to her at the very end when she's sort of at the bottom, really. So we don't really see her in her pomp, except through flashback when we know she's already on the downward spiral. You know, there are some puns. One of her first bands, she was playing with this guy called Captain Ahab, who was in search of the ultimate white noise. There's another one which is a sort of spoof version of Metamorphosis. One day, Greg Wintergreen wakes up to discover he's been turned into a guitar, you know, instead of Kafka's bug. And that's the flesh guitar, or we assume, we're not even told, we assume that's the flesh guitar that she ends up playing. So, you know, I gave this 3 stars because it's sort of vaguely in my sort of sphere of interest, but it's not a great book, to be honest. Dubravka Ugresic, In the Jaws of Life. So when I bought this, which was on second-hand, my sort of trawl with Bookish North and Cilia of second-hand bookstores, I've never heard of it, and I assumed it was a book of short stories, but it isn't really. It's sort of 3, they're not really novella length. I mean, maybe they are short stories, but it's very postmodern. And the problem with, as clever as they were in places, they were completely uninvolving, because the characters were uninvolving. So the first one, which I thought was the best of the lot, it sort of starts off with a woman who's sort of on the brink of depression. She has no partner in life, and she goes to talk to all her friends to try and sort of get advice to snap her out of her funk. And they all have different points of view on the world and on life and happiness and what she should try. So it's described as a patchwork. She's getting a patchwork of sort of ideas, and the chapters are broken up into these different sort of patchwork of people giving her advice. And each chapter is framed with a bit of sort of, homespun advice that you might find in a woman's magazine. There's lots of imagery, and even some of the sort of the visual stuff is about sort of knitting patterns and all that sort of thing. So that aspect of it was really conceptually, I thought that was really strong. And it ends up by the author basically sort of passing this story around to her people whose judgment she trusts. And she's doing the same thing as the character, going around her friends, looking for advice, looking for feedback. And you realise then it's really a piece about sort of women's collective activities. When they used to have sewing circles, or they were employed in the weaving industry. And out of that would come not just gossip, but actual sort of things like, singing and songs and writing as well. These sort of small women's communities that were creative and imaginative and generative. And I thought all that was like really, really neat and really imaginative, but it was uninvolving. So the character who starts off going around with her friends, she sort of slips out of focus, and then it's about the author who wrote that character's story, going around all her friends in a similar way and talking about these ways of how women create is different to how men create. But I couldn't really focus on, there was no stakes. There was intellectual, it appealed to me intellectually, the ideas and conceptually, but there was no stake in it for me because the characters were almost sort of disposable. And then we come on to the second part in this collection of 3 stories. And this was called A Love Story. And, it had its moments. That basically, a woman and a man hook up. The man is a bit of a layabout. He never really works. They're both sort of putative writers in the beginning of their careers. And their relationship is sort of forged through literature, where the man pronounces all literature is dead. We must, completely revolutionise fiction. And he talks about the hyperreal, which is a very different sort of definition of it to the one I had. The one in here, the hyperreal, is a focus on the absolute minutiae of everyday life, and its sort of humdrum, mundane sort of level of detail, and out of that you would get realism and everything. And that's not my understanding of hyperreality. You don't need to know, I don't need to go down that. I'm just discussing what this one is. So their relationship is basically backwards and forwards in that she keeps bringing him her latest work of writing, and he critiques it. And he's trying to get it to be more and more about, real. And this is a metaphor for their relationship because he won't sleep with her. She keeps getting frustrated. And that when she writes erotica, it sort of expresses that rather than being real. So their relationship is an impediment to her writing, and her writing is an impediment to their relationship because it can't get to the next stage of being physical because she has to go back to the drawing board in terms of her writing until she wins him over somehow. Then they can consummate. So it starts off in a really interesting way, but then it just sort of goes round and round, sort of the same thing really. And then I won't give a spoiler, but eventually they do have a relationship, and they last 10 years, and they go their separate ways, and then they meet up again. And it's how what kind of writers they are at that point in their life. So, again, sort of quite uninvolving really, even though the ideas about realism and literature and fiction and relationships and trying to get down to the sort of nitty-gritty relationships, again, intellectually, quite appealing, but emotionally, you're left outside, I felt. And on to the final section, which is a series of sort of modern fairy tales, which start off really well. So the first one is someone buys a hot dog, and instead of it being a Frankfurter or whatever inside, it's a man's penis. And then there's this sort of, slightly fairy tale element of trying to get the penis back to the person who's lost it, and all these different characters, and the policeman who it's handed into, the guy who's lost it, the woman who found it in her hot dog, etc., etc., etc. So that's sort of quite fun. And then the next one was a woman who can't stop eating. She has this sort of, perpetual hunger, and she eats lots of different biscuits just to fill the void. And then one of these particular type of biscuits turns out to be magical and have magical powers. And I thought it was going to be quite an interesting satire on sort of consumerism, because it's very strong sort of focus on the different types of biscuits. But then that sort of petered out. And then we had another one where a writer is writing to his editor about a Russian avant-garde author who was killed in Stalin's purges. And this author wants to write the foreword to a book of this Russian author's writings. And it's done in epistolary fashion of over 10, 15 years of this, now 10 years I think, of this writer writing to the editor saying, why isn't it published yet? Or, when he's finally sort of, his hand is forced and says, this is the publishing date. And then, okay, can I write the foreword? And it sort of just, it just didn't engage me. It really wasn't very interesting. So there's a lot intellectually and conceptually to admire in here, and it does ask questions of what is the relationship of fiction and real life. That's what it's exploring. But peculiarly unengaging, and I really like Dubravka Ugresic, I really like the emotion that she packs into her novels, and yet that was curiously absent here. Until the very last line, and this isn't a spoiler because this is sort of a set of short stories, so I don't think I'm really spoiling anything by the last line, but this sort of tantalised me in the sense of this is what she could have delivered all the way through. So it's using she's used lots of different metaphors in the last story for writing, things that can stand as metaphors for writing paper. So here she's talking about, when he had sat down, I went to pull the page out and read him what I had written. From the typewriter, as though from a magician's hat, one after another, I pulled out white silk handkerchiefs, discreetly perfumed with despair. Which I think is brilliant. You've got the imagery of, page after page after page out of being pulled out of a typewriter. I like those sort of chains of flags that magicians pull out. Discreetly perfumed with despair. So that was my front, that was the last line in the book, and I thought, I've just gone through 260 pages of uninvolving, unemotional stuff, and you produce that. Annoying. So I haven't read William Burroughs in about 20 years, really, maybe longer. And this is a new book. This came out last year. And you always wonder, books after, long after the death of an author, these are just the cuttings from the editing floor of the cinema. Someone's swept them up and put them in a shoebox, and then someone's discovered them and edit them together. Or like a Beyond the Grave, like Biggie Smalls' album, or what was that actor in the film Gladiator? He died during the filming of it, and they sort of went back to the rushes and what could they sort of Oliver Reed, what could they splice in, all that sort of unsatisfactory stuff. But I'm glad to report this is nothing like that. This has been supremely well put together. Mainly from cassette tapes that Burroughs recorded as part of public performances and his reading scripts. And it's called the Revised Boy Scout Manual. And it starts off with basically a call for revolution and what you need to have a successful revolution. And sort of, he talks about different types of weapons, which is sort of Burroughs' fantasy land. He was in love with all sorts of weapons, and he dreamed up new weapons here. And he says things that people haven't thought of, but staring them in the face. So biological warfare could be simply transplanting certain creatures from one continent to another. So, for example, the highly venomous tiger snake in Australia, if you introduce that into America or into Britain, for example, it could wreak havoc. Except, environmentally, it wouldn't be able to survive in Britain because of the weather. And, there's no saying that it would thrive in America. So, I'm not sure about that. But this book basically exhibits everything about Burroughs. So there's his anti-authoritarianism, his sort of anarchistic free spirit, his homoeroticism, his love of all things to do with guns and weapons, a propounding of revolution, particularly about language. The last section of this book is about what he means when he says language as virus, and it's brilliantly dissected by Burroughs as to exactly what he means. And what's so good about this? This book works in its own terms. It's very accessible, but all of this stuff appears in scenes throughout all of his novels. These obsessions with revolution, with mind control, with manipulating language, with sort of homoerotic gangs of boys who become revolutionaries and all this sort of. So they're peppered throughout all of his work. But here, in a short 75-page book, treatise, manifesto, whatever you want to call it, it's absolutely accessible, coherent, whereas in the novels, because they're metaphoricalised and they're sort of woven in and out of plots, and you can't always sort of keep up with all the different characters, they can be a bit more sort of, harder to follow. So this serves as a really good primer if you wanted to sit down with Burroughs' work, his fiction. This book would set you up brilliantly with that, because you would know what his obsessions are, you would know what his metaphors are, because Burroughs chooses his own metaphors and largely sticks to them. Yes, he reworks them in different guises, but they're not everyday metaphors. They are metaphors of the William Burroughs world. And this is a fantastic 5-star read. As I say, it's punchy, it contains all these different elements, it's very funny, it's comedic, it's satirical, it's paranoid. So all of Burroughs is in here. And, sometimes you think, is this for real? Is this a serious sort of manifesto of Burroughs, or is this a serious praxis for revolution? Because he spins out this programme for revolution in Britain, which on the one hand is satirical and funny, but on the other hand you think, oh no, there's something to this. So, he says you need 3 different elements for any kind of revolution. First of all, you need a legitimate political party who are not provocative, are not confrontational, they are not, extra legal, but they are setting the tone of the language and of the narrative that you want to sort of start the revolution. In this case, it's an anti-monarchist movement, but they do not go outside the law. They are democratic, they want to seek peaceful election, and they make their arguments, in a sort of civilised way. The second stream is the hidden side, is the cadres, is the thugs, is the people on the street with the guns and the knives and everything who are stirring up shit for the same cause. And you think, well, what's one got to do with the other? But there's so many movements in the world that operated like that. So the IRA in Northern Ireland were the guys with the guns, and Sinn Féin were their political democratic representatives who always denied that they had links with the IRA. They talked about sort of republicanism in general. So, that's exactly what Burroughs is talking about here. And then the third movement is the interesting one. It's the one I haven't really considered. It says you need a patsy, you need a fall guy. You need also a right-wing group who you basically frame to be sort of propping up and supporting, in this case, the monarchy. And with their outrageous, acts of terror, that unites people on the side of the legitimate political party who are opposed to the monarchy and opposed to these outrageous acts. So, part of it is there's that makes sense, but also part of it is, when he says you get people on the street shouting "Bugger the Queen, bugger the Queen," it's Burroughs being funny. It's Burroughs' satire as well. So I'm just going to read you again an example of this beautiful line that he sort of treads in his writing between this is almost a practical guide versus this is satire. So he talks about sort of assassination, he talks about sort of random assassination, but he also talks about assassination by list. So, who do you assassinate by list? Not the obvious targets, the politicians, narcs and pigs. They are servants who obey orders. So the targets are not the front man, but the higher-ups behind the scenes. You announce that you have a list of these secret controllers and that they will be killed one after the other. The list is guesswork, of course, but the real higher-ups will soon expose themselves. So for a start, we assassinate a Swiss banker. Never go wrong on that. Just get a list of high Swiss bankers and pull his name out of a hat. This is assassination by list, ABL. The rich and powerful cower behind guards and electric fences. So, you know, on the one hand, it's sort of, yeah, there's a logic to that. You know, draw out the other people, you know, the other sort of controllers who are anonymous because they suddenly get scared. But then the satire is, well, you just start the Swiss banker. So, you know, I love this book, and it reminded me why I like William Burroughs so much. So, there you have it. 5 stars, William Burroughs' Revised Boy Scout Manual. 3 stars, Dubravka Ugresic, In the Jaws of Life. And 3 stars for Flesh Guitar, Geoff Nicholson. Okay, so thanks very much. Till next time.